Know the difference with Annex Wealth Management? Amy Kiiskila is Director of Wealth Strategy at Annex Wealth Management, also a CFP and a CPA, and actively involved in the Annex Private Client team. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Danny.
You're also an attorney. Don't want to forget that. You might not have written this, but it's wonderful. Estate planning can be described as the 4 R's, getting the right property to the right people at the right time and in the right way. That is really good.
Yeah, I can't take credit for coming up with it, but what I love about it is that it takes a topic that is really big and feels really daunting, kind of breaks it down to the essentials.
And I appreciate that. So where do we start on this? What are some things to consider about leaving an inheritance? And do we call it inheritance or is it estate? What phrase do you like?
I think inheritance is a great way to think about it because we're thinking about it from the perspective of we are leaving our assets to somebody who's going to receive them. And that's really a great place to start, is thinking about who are these people or beneficiaries that are going to receive your assets. Could be children, could be grandchildren, other family members. So once we identify who those people are, then we can start to think about, okay, when we think about what's going on in the family and what's going on in these people's lives, are there things that concern us or give us pause when we think about leaving our assets to them?
Every family is different. When minors are involved, does that raise the complexity?
It does. It's always something to consider. Now, you have grandchildren, Danny, right? So if you're leaving those two, any assets to those sweet cherubs, they're not able to manage assets on their own yet. They're not adults. So that's a big thing to think about. Also might apply if you have beneficiaries with special needs. They maybe can't receive their assets outright either. So that can add the complexity. There's another big category when we think about concerns about leaving assets, and I think about it as sort of an asset protection category. So think about kids who are really not very good at managing money. Drug and alcohol or gambling problems are big reasons. Or sometimes we may have kids that are in high-risk professions like physicians who might be concerned about managing their assets. Or when we think about our higher net worth families, estate tax planning becomes an issue. And so there could be concerns about causing estate taxes at multiple generations of the family. So thinking about that is a big deal.
How about concern over divorce?
I was going to say that is the biggest one. When you talk about parents and they think about leaving their money to their kids, that's one of their biggest concerns. Well, what if my children get divorced? They don't want that ex-son-in-law or daughter-in-law to receive half of that inheritance.
So over time, we accumulate many things. One of them is assets, and with everything, there are options. What do we need to be mindful there that maybe we didn't cover just now?
You're really thinking there about the spectrum of how you can leave assets to your beneficiaries. So on one end, it's really simple, right? You just leave the assets outright to them. So if you think about those concerns and maybe they aren't present in your family, or maybe you say they are and I'm okay with whatever that result is, I don't want to rule from the grave, you can just leave the assets outright.
You can come close, though.
You can come close. That's exactly right. If you do say, well, I do have concerns and I want to make sure my plan addresses those, that's where you start to think about, can we put parameters around how and when people get these assets? And with that, you're typically using a trust.
Yeah, but a lot of money drops out of the sky all of a sudden. That could be an issue.
It can be an issue if your kids aren't kind of prepared for it and don't have the right tools in place to be able to manage it. You can see a lot of inheritances sort of get wasted away over the first couple of years after mom or dad dies.
So can you stagger the amounts over time?
You can. So you can set up a trust and really have that trust address kind of the specific issues for your family. So that could be staggering the amounts over time. It could be leaving assets in trust for their lifetime. So we see that more often where asset protections are big concerns, or divorce or estate tax planning. You might say it's going to stay in trust for the lifetime. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have access to the assets. So the trust will talk about how and when distributions can be made. Can be very broad, can be narrow, or for specific purposes, or it could be what we incentivize behavior, like a carrot and stick approach. Sometimes a trust will say, trustee, make distributions to match earnings, for example. Or it might say withhold distributions if there's drug or alcohol issues.
We're covering estate planning with Amy Kiiskila, Director of Wealth Strategy at Annex Wealth Management, part of the Annex Private Client team. Getting it right the way you want means details need to be squared away. An important aspect is who's in charge and how do you do that?
That is a big question. If we think about leaving assets in trust for beneficiaries, you're going to have to name a trustee, the person who manages the assets and determines when distributions are made. And here again, tie it back to the reason that having a trust is important to you. The trustee can be a family member. It could be the beneficiary themselves. So if you think about those minor children or grandchildren, when they're minors, you're going to have maybe another family member serve as trustee. As kids get older, become adult and into young adulthood, then you might start to say, okay, I think they're ready now. Maybe we start to have that beneficiary serve as a co-trustee or the sole trustee of their own trust. And in some circumstances, it might be most appropriate to have a corporate trustee. So if you complex assets or complex family dynamics, sometimes parents just don't have an individual that they're comfortable naming. Good reason to think of a corporate trustee. Or when you're looking at doing kind of planning through multiple generations, so more of like a dynasty trust planning, then a corporate trustee can really bring a lot of benefits to that situation as well.
Amy Kiiskila, Director of Wealth Strategy at Annex Wealth Management. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny.